Welcome to today's episode of On the Block. Today we will examine the developments in Web3 and blockchain technology. We will also discuss how traditional financial institutions are exploring blockchain and DeFi use cases, but also how blockchain can help in AI projects with federated learning and what is the role of permissioned blockchain in the DeFi landscape. I'm Przemysław Koper from SPO Software, and I have Dominik, our consulting director, with me today. And we are honored to welcome Thomas van der Broek, CEO and co-founder of Intersect. Thomas, thank you so much for joining the call. We are so happy to have you here. I need to say that you're probably my most favorite extrovert on the web. I love to hear you talking about blockchain. And okay, so maybe we can just start a bit to tell our viewers about yourself. And you have a really strong background in Web3 and blockchain space. You run a consultancy services firm, Intersect, as a CEO. You guys provide services in software development, innovation, product design, strategy, and so on. And everything is actually blockchain focused. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is, well, first off, thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the compliment of being a very happy or most favorite extrovert. I don't hear that often, so that's very nice. Yes, we're doing everything what you said, plus more. My co-founder, my two co-founders, Paul Edmund and Veronica Wapinska, are both obviously doing similar things. My priority has always been blockchain because I've been doing blockchain for 8 years. Cole comes from the Bay Area, so he's been in AI before AI was cool. I always say, like hard data science, NLP, like stuff that is actually makes AI tick. He's been doing that for a very long time. And Veronica is heading up our recruitment arm that we actually started this year. And that's specifically for our in-house clients that would like to transfer to either an in-house team or anything in that region. This is something that we generally do on request. We're not like a recruitment firm in and on itself, but we have a lot of network and we have a good perspective of the market. So if the deal is interesting or we like our client very much and they're asking for it, then we're willing to consider that.
Sure, and you're still talking about tech teams, right?
Absolutely. We're only our focus is and will always be tech. We do a little bit of venture building on the side. We have a large network of, I'd say, third-party services like legal, both here in Europe and in the US, marketing and everything around it. But our focus is always tech. And then obviously, as I said before, we're doing some bit of venture building, but we also want to kind of give back to the community. So I'm a mentor for the CV Labs accelerator for the last 3 years, and we're doing workshops there as well. Like we generally talk about UI UX in Web3. Very fun topic to talk about. And by the way, I'm not a Web3 expert, but our workshop is about like understanding how UI and UX should work in general, right? And Web3 is notoriously bad with UI UX. And we also do heavy technical road mapping with our PhD team, and that's for the accelerator for CV. And since this year, we're also going to do it for Cardano, and I'm also a mentor for the Cardano accelerator. That happens in June, I believe.
So, Thomas, when you first encountered blockchain technology, what aspects of it resonated with you, and what makes you attracted to it today?
Oh man, that's a long time ago, Dominik.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, it's like
almost 8 years or more.
Yeah, it's like 2017. We started. We got contracted by a company to build a DAG consensus layer 0, which I remember looking at it and I was like, this is basically just a research paper. You want us to build something? Okay, that's fine. And then we started building it, and then you get sucked in by how interesting this is. I've never had any. We've done a lot of like data engineering or pipelines or that kind of stuff. Like we built a lot of software in the past, and then you hit blockchain. Blockchain is something completely different. It definitely in those times, and you guys probably remember that too. But you needed to looked completely different. How he built software, it was uncharted territory, and that's something that I was like, whoa, uncharted territory. Wow, what is this? Like, why does it work like this? Why doesn't it work like this? How does community management work? And then, those doors go open, and you see things go super well. You see things go fail, but it piqued my interest that there were a bunch of crazy entrepreneurs thinking that this technology actually could change the world, and I was like, all right. I actually like
Let's
because
dive. Let's dive into that.
let's be very clear because before that I was kind of a bit tired of tech. I was like, yeah, done it now for so long. I built so many fucking SaaS platforms. Excuse my French. Um, let's do something. Like I want to do something new, like something really new. And then blockchain came around. And I was like, whoa! And that was the rabbit hole moment for me. And then I got pulled in. I started running nodes, and we built it in Scala, and we're still talking to these guys, but we built it in Scala. And Scala, as you guys know, it's not an easy language to build. And you're having like a newly invented tech, and then that consensus was not done before, only theorized. And we're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it in Scala because it seems to be the best way. I mean, it was batshit crazy, and that was the fun of it for me. I was like, oh yeah, more crazy stuff. Let's do this, so that. Like, oh, we need audits. How do audits work? So you just I soaked in all that knowledge, and I got deeper and deeper and deeper, and I couldn't stop myself. Right at some point, I was like, I don't want to do tech anymore. I only want to do blockchain. Anything else is boring to me right now. So here we are.
Yeah, because I just think because it's not just another tech stack, right? It's just a way of doing things and way of thinking about business, technology, ecosystems, and so on. So it's much bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it also attract definitely those times, and it obviously changes a little bit with years because I think the industry matures. But those times, and I consider myself coming in late because I have a lot of friends that kind of started in 2013, 14, like the real OGs. But it attracted a certain kind of entrepreneur and a certain kind of developer that, like, if you wanted to do your 9 to 5 and have a steady income and have a steady life, yeah, you shouldn't go into blockchain, and definitely not in those times, right? Because it was just like the market was weird, like heavy peaks, things would go to zero and then back up, and it was a great crazy time. And now if you look at it, like, we're now what, 8, 9 years further. There's a lot of institutional money coming in. There's a lot of people in that actually know what they're doing. Like if you look at DeFi, I mean, it developed massively into. I don't think that we're there yet, but there's so much more value than there was, like, let's say 8, 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's all like, those trailblazers that started, and I don't call myself a trailblazer. Like I just got, contracted, and I just fell into the rabbit hole. But those trailblazers that decided to do this and raise money for it and do it, I mean, those are in my head, those are legends, even the ones that failed, right? Because you build on failures, in my opinion.
Definitely. And regarding that sort of journey, I'm interested in the very beginning and touching up on your venture building experience and still on Web3 as well. So how would you say, like, how do you establish a compelling value proposition for the early stage project in Web3?
Oh man, that's a good question, and I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Are you looking at it from a tech perspective? Are you looking at it from an end user perspective? Are you looking at it from, I don't know, go-to-market marketing perspective? We always looked at it from a tech perspective, and having done it so many times, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in marketing or legal, but you know what works and what doesn't, except for tokenomics, because I'm just not smart enough to dig deep in like the economics, right? Not the token, the economics of a platform. But I always say battle test your shit as soon as you can, right? Like literally, if you have an idea, and we've seen this, over the last like 8 years, and luckily it changed, but we had these crypto booms where just people like threw money at the wall and see what stuck, right? And they're like, okay, well, I'm going to invest $1 million in this crazy idea that I have. I don't know. We're going to be the next Ticketmaster, or we're going to be the next, name it. Like we're going to be the next central bank of Europe. We've all seen these crazy things. And then they build for 18 months, and then they come out and it turns out to be complete garbage, or the end user doesn't want it. So we always say, when you start like pre-seed angel rounds, family round, like you have like what, 20, 30, maybe $40,000. start small and go super aggressively into the market. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't look as sexy as you want it to look. It doesn't matter that, 40% of your features don't necessarily work right off the start, but make sure that the other 60% is working like flawless. Make sure that your users, when they open their app, they have that wow experience, right? They're like, oh shit. Like I always give the, in fintech, I think it's a good example. Revolut. Revolut's a very good example of, you open the app, you know exactly what to do, where to go, what to do it. And if you can't like bring that to your early stage users, then you get good feedback. And that's the feedback you'll need in order to build further, to actually scale further and to understand if this is the way we need to pivot. I think a lot of people, definitely first time founders, are very scared to pivot as well. But I always say, yeah, don't be scared. I mean, if you throw, like, for a lot of people, it's like $40,000 is a lot of money, and it is. But if you look at it in the large scheme of things, it isn't, right? Because if you go with a bad idea, you start raising it, and you raise another $500,000 or $1 million, you start spending another 18 months building it, and it turns out nobody wants it, or it's just not possible. You just spend 2-3 years doing nothing useful, right? And that is fine, but that's always what I said. Like, didn't you do useful because you didn't want to pivot and you could pivot before? Or did you just believe very heavily and the market moved on? Because that happens as well, right? So I'm always like, move very quick in this industry. Like, throw something out, get your users out, get your marketing out, bring those users in, get the feedback. Like, test it with 100 or 1,000 people if you can. And then if you feel that it's a good idea, then and you got the right feedback and you don't want to pivot, then be super fucking stubborn and just go straight forward and go do it, right? And those are that sounds very easy, but those are like 9 steps of market validation, and also emotionally probably more steps to do. So
Yeah, I think it's actually, emotions. This is the big obstacle on the way, right? So because you always, for example, you are very stubborn, right? And actually you should pivot. And this is like the impossible situation, right?
yeah, and I mean, we've seen it ourselves. We've seen it with our clients. So to give an example, when we started Intersect, before we worked with Study Dynamic, we were both partners there, Cole and myself. And Study Dynamic casted more of a wider net towards their tech founders, and they're exceptionally good at non-tech founding clients. They're really good at that. But it was too wide, right? And Cole and I at some point said, like, yeah, we want to pivot into something that is niche and that we know works because we've done this for so long. And if we're gonna do everything, then we're not really putting our value and our perspectives and our knowledge and our network into this thing that we believe can work. And when we started Intersect, and again, this is a consultancy, right? This is not even a product company, but this is a consultancy. We also started like taking a bunch of clients and thought about this and this, and we're going to do that. And then we're like, no, you know what? We're just going to go back to the core. What are we good at? AI, Web3. Okay, that's what we're going to do. And then, with Veronica on board, she's a great recruiter. So naturally then recruitment comes onto the table. But if you're not doing what you're good at or what your beliefs are, or your stubbornness can actually, because stubbornness also gives, I don't know, I would say energy, right? If everybody says no, you're like, all right, I'll show them. But if you don't feel that for the topics that you want to do, yeah, you should probably pivot.
Yeah, so building a company is quite similar to building products. Yeah, in the case of company, you need to find clients. In the case of a product, you need to find users. And in this very kind of active space and very changeable space like Web3, do you think are there any kind of hints or kind of you can somehow advise how to identify and engage early adopters in this kind of projects? Because you are saying that we need to gather feedback very, very quickly. We need to kind of make pivots and so on.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, generally, I always say this, like, and this doesn't necessarily always go for young first time founders, because they always have the market against them.
Mm-hmm.
First off, your network is your net worth, right? Most people that start a company do so because they see a problem in the market that nobody else sees, or they have an issue with, and they hear around them there is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that, like, if you have that perspective and you have that network, and you have, let's say, of the 20,000 people that you have in your network, and I'm just saying a number, hundreds have the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first way to adopt, like, look at those early adopters, like, ask around, right? even before you get started, because we've had clients that were so sure about themselves. They're like, yeah, no, but everybody wants this. Okay, have you beta tested this? No, but I talked to 5 people. It's like, yeah, okay, but you got to talk to 100 people. And then you got to figure out if those 100 people actually want to buy your stuff, right? So I think how to identify those people is one, well, if you're in an industry that needs a niche solution, then you probably have the context to test it with them. And then second, I think it's a very important question is, will those people be able to pay for it? Do they want to pay for it? And how much do they want to pay for it? And I think if you can answer those questions, if people say, yeah, okay, you know what? I like what SPO does. I will put some money on the table because I actually know that if I put money on the table, I get something back that I want. Okay, perfect. Now make sure that your data set is big enough to actually prove that everybody wants it. And also, like, I think that's the first start of early adopters, right? Like that's in my head. If you can answer those 3 questions with very strong value proposition, now you got to just figure out how big your market is and if you can multiply the numbers that you currently have. That is how I would identify. And that's always what the clients that I say, talk to your community, talk to your network, talk to the people that are in your industry, the problem that you're solving, people that have, because you ask your mom will always say, yeah, no, it's a great idea, Dominic. Like, I mean, I'm proud of you. And you're like, okay, mom, thank you. Are you going to buy it? No, but because I don't need it. So, find people that actually can be critical and give you good feedback. Also criticize, because that's the first pivot you make. Oh, shit. People think it's a good idea, but nobody wants to pay for it. All right.
And in case you don't have to broad network and you still want to kind of get feedback, and maybe you should kind of start building the community or kind of engage somehow the people around some topics. So did you encounter any kind of an attempts to do this, or did you help anyone to build such communities?
Funnily enough, I was that person. I remember when I started heading the blockchain division of Stellar Dynamic, I was like, okay, I was always a project manager, right? Like, I built things. I was never the sales guy, and I hated sales. And still, I do it because I like helping people. I don't like sales. So, but I did realize, like, to your point, I did realize, like, I have a network, but they're all builders. So they're not going to buy what I'm selling. So I need to find people that want to buy from me. And so I looked around, I realized all my network is healthcare, because I used to work in healthcare when I was back in the Netherlands, or builders in Poland, and some American contacts that I had via the blockchain space. And I was like, okay, what do people do when they have an idea and they need people? It's like conferences. So I started to go to conferences, and it's a double-edged sword. I'll say that. On one hand, I think there's a lot of value in conferences. On the other hand, it can be an enormous time waste if you don't know what you're doing. True. And I will say up front that you probably, the first time you go to a conference, you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. You're like, okay, what should I try to just talk to people, or like how does networking?
It's hard to scale, right?
It is. Luckily, I found a group of people that I started going to all these Web3 events. So you get pulled into. We pulled the connectivity together, and then everybody introduced everybody. So I got really quick a larger network, which helped for me as a consultancy. And then you guys know this as well. As builders in this space, builders go a lot to conferences, end users, or people that you actually, those are your end customers, not really. However, if you're a builder and you have an entrepreneur, you have a new idea, I think it's an excellent time to go and check out what the market actually does, because maybe your idea is not that great, or maybe your idea is really great, and that can be that first confirmation of your idea. It's like, shit, this is something I should start pursuing, right? Like, maybe I can get a grant, maybe I can get something else. Conferences are a great point there. If you're, I think, in a later stage product, I just spoke to a couple of people that went to ETH Denver last week. Everybody's shilling their own product. There's not really end users there. So if your end user is a Web2 client or a regular Web3 DeFi user, you won't find them on conferences, right? Like, conferences is B2B, in my opinion. And it's not like, is it Web Summit in Portugal, in Lisbon? That's always, I think, been visited by also consumers and I think more tech people that are also consuming, rather than conferences in our space. Not every.
So what are the kind of top 3 conferences for builders in the Web3 space? If you kind of just want to limit yourself to Europe, or maybe you want to propose some kind of US-based conferences.
I would say early stage. I think ETH Denver is one of my favorite for builder conference. It is. Have you guys been there?
I haven't been there.
Yeah, me neither. But if you kind of suggest that much, maybe I go.
It is no, yeah. Let me shill ETH Denver for you.
No, sell it to us.
I think that it's super interesting as a builder, not necessarily as a dev agency, but as a builder to chat with other builders. There's hackathons. There's this whole builder community, and there's Solana hacker houses, and it's a vibrant community of builders, and definitely. And I don't mean this with any disrespect, but the garage developers, like people that do this in their hobby time, trying to figure out what works. I think ETH Denver is great. I also really liked EFCC. I think last year it was in Brussels. The year before it was in Paris, or maybe 2 years ago already. I'm not sure. Because EFCC is similar. It merges, I would say, actual later stage products with early stage builders. There's hackathons, and I think last year were like 200 side events. So there is something for everyone. And what I always say, like, look, the main conference is fun, but go for the side events, because that's actually where you find people that are like-minded or looking for similar things as a builder. And then I heard very good things. I've never been to Token, but I heard very good things about Token in Dubai. I would not recommend Singapore, because Singapore generally is more Asian focused, and unless your startup or your consultancy or dev agency is Asian focused, I think Singapore is the way to go. Otherwise, Dubai is perfect. But keep in mind, those ones are like larger. They're a little bit more institutional. I think you get other knowledge, and like, once again, I think there's other market confirmation to be found there. But if you want builder conferences, I would say ECC and ETH Denver. And generally, I think every ETH, insert city has value as an builder, because there's always big builder communities, right? With the ETH conferences.
You didn't mention anything in Europe.
Brussels.
So that was Brussels. Okay.
Brussels, Paris.
Okay. Didn't know that.
And I don't know, a couple years ago, you had the Lisbon Blockchain Week. I mean, it was kind of a blockchain week, and I'm sure it was the official thing. And we had Solana Breakpoint, and we did everything. That was valuable too. So it's like specific chain conferences can be good too. Like you have these ICP days and Solana Breakpoints. If you want to build on that, then yeah, those are great, because there's a large community and there's a large amount of members that will try to help you, or at least like push it to the next step. So, and what I said, you have ETH Warsaw, obviously, you have MBX here in Warsaw as well. I think that's happening in 2 weeks. So there is a lot of builder conferences. I think if you want to go for institutional or something with like later stage product, probably Consensus, Token, DevCon is probably more builder as well. That's actually I heard. I've never been to DevCon, but I heard good things there regarding building as well. So there is, I think, there's something for everyone, but you just got to make sure that you go with the right goal, right? Like if you wanna shill your product, then probably going to a builder conference, unless you have a builder a builder product, makes sense. Otherwise, don't go, right? Like if you go for connections, probably like, an EFCC, which is very large here in Europe, you should probably go there. If you're looking for institutional connections, all of the above, but then just, focus on side events where it's institutional.
Yeah.
And then the last thing, and that's always what I say, if you can get invite-only events, those are the ones that yield generally the best result, because they're highly curated and highly quality based events.
Yeah, and coming back to be prepared to actually attend different events. It's, again, side events that you mentioned. I think, honestly, in my experience, this is where the most important connections are being made. And even if it's like a, sunset boat trip after the official day and so on, this is actually where you should be, and like networking events, parties around the main event and so on, right?
Yeah, I will add one thing, and not everybody agrees with me, but the people that I've been going, like we used to do the parties when we were younger and wilder. Feels like 60, but no, but meant, I mean, you're in blockchain long enough, it feels like you're 60. But no, I always say like the value extraction happens up until 10 p.m. After that, it's party, and that's fine. But up until 10 p.m., you can have the dinners, like the the bars. Those are great. Like if you go partying, that's great, but don't expect high quality connections. I mean, maybe get lucky, or I don't know. You look as great as Dominic, and then people will come to you to connect. But otherwise, like people like me, like I gotta work hard for my connections.
And looking at this journey of concept into the MVP, let's say, into the product and so on the market, like looking at all the builders, all the concepts that you can, for example, discuss about during that sort of event, what would be the indicator for you that that exact concept is actually ready to become, let's say, an MVP? What would you be looking for?
That's a good question. I would generally look for, well, I think two things. One is founders that know what they're, that have the data to prove it. And honestly, often those are founders that are not first-time founders. And we're talking about success rate a little bit as well, right? I always say, look, we're building for everyone who wants to build, but you need to have a data that proves that your market actually wants this. Otherwise, we're building for nothing, and we don't like building for nothing, right? So if you can prove that your network is large enough, if you're like, for instance, to give an example, we have and I'm under NDA, so I can't say too much about it, but we currently have a client, which by the way, not Web3, has a large community, and he decided to build an app to actually, add more value to the community than there currently is. And he said, like, look, I have like over 600 people in that community. I can get a lot of value extraction from the app that I'm building, but I can also bring people more together because it's more like a business community. And I'm like, hey, that's a great idea. You have the numbers, you have the connections, you have the events, the previous events to prove that this works. Now let's digitalize it and make it make more sense, right? So
yeah.
So if you have that data, perfect, right? Like what I said, generally first-time founders don't think that way. They're like, oh, I have a great idea, let's go do it. So I would say proof of concept, and we sometimes go one step earlier. We have something called POCP, proof of clear path, which is our and this is generally goes for only for very complex. Okay, we have a project about homomorphic encryption, super complex stuff. The guy has a really good technical idea. He doesn't know if it's workable and if it actually makes sense to build and if there's actually a market for it. He thinks there's a market for it because he has a large network in the industry where he thinks it could work. Okay, great. An MVP is going to probably cost, I don't know, and I'm throwing numbers out here, right? Let's say 400,000. And, okay, 400,000, that's a lot of money. First-time founder, has a large network, thinks he can prove it, but he doesn't know exactly if the technology is going to get him what he wants. So what we do, we actually start before a POC. We do a POCP, which is a kind of a research phase where we build the concept tech. It can be used by more than 10 people at the same time. And then once we can prove that the technology actually works, and what I said, only very complex things, because most SaaS or Web2 things, or even simple Web3 things don't need this. We actually say, okay, now we're going to do a POC. And I think when it comes to POC and MVP, people like very often look at it in the wrong way. And I myself have looked at it very often in the wrong way. And I like to qualify it now, or like a POC it's literally a proof of concept. Like you prove your concept. You can go race with a proof of concept. If your proof of concept is great, do it. You'll probably have 1 or 2 happy flows for users. You won't be able to extract value. There's nothing. There's no meat, right? But you can show it works. This can be super valuable for raising, for MVPs, and this is, I think, where people go wrong very often. I always say, look, an MVP is a minimum viable product, which means if we're building a project or a product together, then it needs to be one user flow that is a happy flow. There's retention in it, and it just that user can use this app until eternity, and that's it. This is your USP, right? very often an MVP has been looked at totally different. I truly believe that an MVP is one feature set, and it doesn't matter how nice and beautifully you put, UI UX on top. It's one feature set, and it needs to be from A to Z. And if it's a paid platform, it needs to be able to Stripe integration or whatever you do. I see very often, if we explain this to founders, some founders that we work with, they're like, yeah, no, but I want something bigger. I'm like, okay, but you don't have market validation. You don't have product market fit. And you're want to spend, you're willing to, stake, let's say $150,000 or $100,000 on something you don't know if it works. So what if we spend 30,000 and we'll build you the POC and you go race with it, or you put it out in the market, you put it to your friends, right? Or let's say you do 60K for your MVP and you get the feedback and you see it works. And if you get with MVPs, I think what the great thing is there, you can get retention. Retention is a super powerful metric, right? Like, let's say if 100 people use your MVP, okay, that may not be much, but if of those 100 people, 60 use it every week or every 2 weeks, man, that's retention. Those are numbers venture capital loves that. Or, if you want to bootstrap 30, do friends and family rounds. So once again, data-driven, understanding what your technology can do for you, but also, and this is, I think, the most important thing, and that's what first-time founders tend to forget, know what you don't know. You don't need to know everything, right? Like, look, I run a blockchain consultancy. I know a lot about blockchain, but if I talk to my PhD team, I literally feel like I'm back in college again. And that's great because those guys, it would be bad if I knew as much as them. But I know that I don't know. So I run my technical decisions with them. I run sales decisions with Cole, right? I run recruitment decisions with Veronica. I run legal decisions with my lawyer. So as a founder, knowing what you don't know is super important. If you're deciding that you know everything, for us, that's a red flag. We stop working with you. We're like, okay, if you know everything, you know nothing, and then you're gonna probably lose a lot of sanity and financial capacity in the next 3 to 6 months if you start doing this. And we don't want to be involved in that. We will try to, educate you that you shouldn't do it. But if you think that you know everything, okay, you should probably do something else and, not be a founder. So that's a really, really important metric for us. And if you look at the current state of the market, at least in Web3, there's more and more people that sit in that MVP piece that say like, hey, I don't know everything. I want to do legal tech in Web3. I'm an insanely good lawyer and I have an insanely large network, but I have no idea how I could scope this out. Great. Love to work with you.
The market has changed, since we last since we started, in
Absolutely.
2018, 17. So at that time, it was kind of enough to have just a good idea and kind of to go to marketing and raise funding. Now people are kind of, users are kind of more demanding, more major, and wanted also to discuss this current perspective of Web2 market. So you have kind of latest changes in politics, into regulations, the trading market is also more major. You have kind of ETFs for crypto. So all this kind of makes Web3 kind of more close to the normal people. But I wanted to ask you, how do you see for instance, the advancements in zero knowledge proofs and privacy enhancing technologies, how they address kind of concerns of regulators and concerns of real people, and how it influences the growth of Web3 and adoption of Web3 products?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I think there's a difference between Asia, Europe, and China, and I'm not Asia, Europe, and United States, right? Like, I think those are the three buckets that we're looking at. I am not an expert on Asia because we don't do any business there, and I'm generally not an expert on regulation that heavily, but I do see MiCA coming in, and to your point, like, the privacy protocols and zero knowledge. I think in its essence, it's really good stuff, right? Like, it's we're very early in that matter in that industry. I think that we're not yet mature enough to understand. I think that the industry understands what the value proposition of this is. I think the people outside don't, the regulators and generally lesser known tech people understand what that actually means. Because one of my team members, like from our PhD team, was said, "It's like blockchain is not an user-friendly technology."
It is,
And
yeah.
It is, right? So you're gonna try to explain what zero knowledge means to a regulator in Brussels. They're gonna be like, "Okay, can you dump it down?" It's like, well, yes, and then still the concept is super abstract. And the similar thing goes with generally with the privacy perspectives that we're having. And but which protocol was it where the developer got arrested in the Netherlands last year? Was that Monero, I think? It shows that, you know, the Dutch government in this case said like, oh yeah, but you build it, so you're responsible. Like, no, because I don't have access to the funds or what happens there. I just built the mechanism. So I think we're still very far away from the educational piece into larger
It was Tornado
like government
Cash,
bodies.
I think,
Yeah.
in Netherlands.
No, well, but also in Brussels and Europe. Like, I don't think that there's definitely advancements. But if you look at Mika, there's a lot of good things, but I think it's overreaching. And I've not dug into the last published version because we're happens to do a lot of business in the US. But you know, having KYC over wallets and this kind of stuff, I get it, but this feels like an overreach. You know, you want to make a centralized DeFi, basically. And that's, you know, the market will always fight that. The question is how much lobby and money and banks will throw their weights behind it in order to make it centralized. Because in the end, I think it's a power question, right? Like, if you can track money streams, that's incredibly valuable. And currently we're doing that centralized via banks, but only banks and governments can see it. You know, decentralized exchanges, centralized exchanges are, I think, part of that problem too. Decentralized finance has the issue that we're not regulated, and then you get all these crazy rug pulls and meme coins. So I don't. There is a need for regulation, and that's something that I strongly believe in. How that needs to be regulated, honestly, the more I read into it, the less I know how to solve this issue, because it is such a complex issue, and it needs to be solved by, I think, technical people, regulators, politicians, banks. And as long as everybody has the same agenda, that will work. But I have a doubt that people think the same way about this problem, right? Like, I think
it is a big challenge, yeah, because we are, for instance, talking with our clients from the traditional finances space who want to kind of to enter the DeFi, and they kind of are somehow afraid that their users who are not Web3 natives, we have troubles kind of just to operate wallets, kind of authenticate, use passwords, because and not mentioning all the security kind of issues that it's quite easy to kind of to somehow mislead someone to take the funds out of the wallet. We are seeing different hacks, yeah, like even this BitBay big hack. It was kind of done on potentially very, very secure cold wallet, yeah.
This is what makes it so hard, right? Because on one hand, and then because I wanted to add to this, you have the guaranteed deposits with most large banks, right? Like, okay, so let's say I'm gonna start banking with my DeFi account. I get hacked. Are they gonna get me that money back? Probably not, because they're like, well, it's not our money. It's like your coins that you invested in some crappy. We're not gonna be part of that. So. And on the other hand, like, and what makes it so hard is I absolutely agree with that sentiment. On the other hand, I also think if you look at banks and corporations, they work always on the illusion that banks are safe. Banks aren't safe as well. Granted, takes a little bit more, but if I want to...
That's a bold statement.
Well, I mean, like, right? Like, your general 60, 70 plus bank person, or the person who banks at whatever bank, they're not keeping up to date with multi-factor authentication or all this kind of stuff. Like, so they're as and we're talking, you know, we're a bunch of tech people. We understand how this works. And then still, by the way, not every tech person, like, you know, I generalize right now, but generally most tech people understand how tech works. So they're not getting hacked or getting scammed is a lot. Chances are smaller, not zero, but smaller. But your average non-tech person, like security, most people I talk to, they don't even have a password manager. So, if people say like, yeah, but I'm afraid I'm getting hacked with DeFi. I'm like, well, you should be afraid that you get identity fraud or like, get your multi-factor and your passwords in order before we talk about how unsafe DeFi is. I do agree that it's not safe enough, but the counter argument's also not a fair argument. Feels for me at least. So it's one of my friends always said, look, if we wanted to have a secure society, everything would have taken 20 seconds longer. But we're living in a society where stuff is like fast, right? Like, we can't wait 20 seconds for something to load or 20 seconds for your phone to open or 20 seconds for whatever to happen. You want to have it yesterday. And that's part of the problem, right? So security will never be watertight on whatever level. I think the DeFi is exceptionally scary because when the money is gone, it's really gone. And with banks, you can somehow get it back because there's, support and there's at least the illusion of security, right?
I thought I've heard for a second that you're saying banks are not that bad.
Oh, no, I mean, look, I am not like, and this is, I think, the big difference with, I'm criticizing blockchain all the time because I'm like, our motto is, why do you need the blockchain? And if you can't explain that to me in a linear, you don't need a blockchain, right? Like, I'm not saying the banks are good. I think that it's the status quo and it's being challenged right now by blockchain. I don't think that blockchain is mature enough to challenge it. The problem with the banks is that there's such a massive lobby behind it. And we're so dependent on them. Like, even if we said like, okay, from next year, we stop the power of the banks. I mean, to untangle the global markets and trade and everything, it's got to be a show, right? You need centralized institutions to run things. The question is, what kind of technology should they run it? And should we be able to audit them better? Well, that's the blockchain. I think the $1 million blockchain question that has a lot of value. And now if you want to put your tinfoil hat on, you could say, well, maybe banks don't want to get audited by blockchain because then maybe stuff comes out that you don't want to have coming out. Who knows? I always assume the following is like, if you're a large business that operates with large financial capacity, be it a corporate or anything, there is always overhead that's going to be misused, right? So I think that in the end, banks are not good for sure, but they play a role in our current, in the current life, right? Like, it's really hard to debank. If you really wanted to, it's really hard to debank right now.
Yeah, but if you look at like some examples of big organizations and financial institutions, banks, actually implementing projects in blockchain like DeFi, Web3 or whatever, like if you look at Deutsche Bank, Visa, for example, Nasdaq. So don't you think it's actually, going in the right direction? What's your opinion on this? Is it actually an example of, this big ship moving a bit in the direction we would like it to go to?
Man, that's such a hard question, Przemek. Like, I don't know. This is the same thing about if you would ask me, is like, what do you think of the ETFs? I mean, I think the exposure is great. I think it's terrible for the market. I think it ruined part of the market in the sense of how we used to look at our cycles. There's definitely more exposure. You could, like, I always ask the question, why? Why do they want to go that direction? Because there is value extraction for them there. But if a bank runs a DeFi exchange, is it still DeFi? I see, and it's, it would be my personal opinion. I might be wrong. And if any banker or anyone listens to this podcast later on, please, send me an invite on LinkedIn because I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into this. But my guess is that, okay, they see that the ship is sailing, right? Like, Bitcoin is now an ETF, Ethereum, like we're going into the direction where things getting a lot more institutional attention. So I think the banks are like, we cannot let that happen, or we cannot be not part of it, because if there's a large financial movement going on, we need to be part of that, for good or for bad, right? Like the bank's actual value is making money. course, they will make money in ETFs and DeFi. So once again, I think that the attention is good. The perspective is good. I think for the larger public, I'm not sure if banks are as positive about it as we are in this industry. But once again, I might be very wrong. So, anybody who's listening is like, now, Thomas, you're so wrong on multiple levels. Well, please, and I would love to have a call and understand it better, because in the end, we're not working much with banks. We do fintech, but banks are, I think that's actually more your side of the coin, right? You guys are sitting more in the institutional side of things.
Yeah. And that's what I kind of wanted to ask, because I don't think it's kind of bad thing that traditional institutions from the finance sector experiment with blockchain, kind of try to enter that space. But in general, because you are a big advocate of kind of public blockchain and non-permissioned blockchain, and here in SPO we also specialize in permissioned private blockchains like Hyperledger Fabric. So, what's your view on the permissioned blockchains?
Oh, I love them, because this is actually technology and it has nothing to do with financial incentives. I think, and we've had this discussion, I think, with the three of us a while ago about permission blockchains and Hyperledger, and I think it's a super interesting space that can actually add an incredible amount of value to corporate institutions like banks, right?
Yeah.
Do they need to enter the space with anything else? I don't think so. But when you look at audits, when you look at safety, data governance, I think this is Hyperledger is, and I've not worked too much with it, but one for one, it's better than any blockchain out there, I think, for these kind of banks. Like, I mean, yeah, great that Ripple and whoever is talking about adding financial services or perspectives to banks, but I don't believe in that, because they always have their own financial incentives. Hyperledger in itself is just technology, and that's what I love about it's the simplicity of what blockchain can offer. So to your point, Dominic, experimenting with technology, I think, is a massive win, right? I always say, look, if banks are going into the direction of the financial aspect of blockchain, like the crypto aspect, I don't see the value there, but I do see it the other way around, where it's just like, hey, implement your blockchain technologies into your existing stack for audits, for data governance, for anything else, because it will make life easier, more optimized, more streamlined, and it keeps you more, I think, accountable as well. Definitely with the features that Hyperledger offers, because it's a massive feature stack, and I'm assuming they keep on building, because I've not looked at them for the last couple of months, but
they are moving on. We are moving on.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so to your point, technology, yes. Financial, I don't know. I think it's a danger for them, or it threatens them. I think that the technology stack, one for one. I mean, if you guys implement anything with banks, that is super cool, because that actually will make a difference, right? That will make optimize things, and that's. I always say, look, I'm not necessarily a crypto advocate, but I'm a very big blockchain advocate, in the sense that I do believe that this technology can make things more transparent. I don't think it's the redeemer of all the sins that we've done in over the last 100 years with technology, but I do think it makes things just more transparent, and based on that, we can build better products.
So would you say that you actually don't believe in this hybrid model where crypto and traditional finance can actually live under the same hood?
Well, I want to believe in it. I'm not sure if it's possible from a political or regulation perspective. If you look at, I mean, it's the same a little bit with peer-to-peer downloading, right? Back in the day, that couldn't really coexist with anything legal, because the legal entities couldn't look into what was actually happening with the peer-to-peer downloading stuff. So they put legal action on top of it. I'm not sure if it is one for one the same with DeFi and banks, but I don't see why a bank should add DeFi products to their stack, because it goes inherently against everything that they do, right? Like, what they do is they're making money off the people's money, right? So if you have DeFi, then they don't own any of that. That nothing goes into their account that they cannot use to hedge their bets or whatever. So I'm always like, is that, it feels for me that it stands not next to each other but against each other. But are you guys building? Because like I'm very curious about this though. Are you guys building, let's say, do you have a centralized bank that is interested in looking at the DeFi space, and how do they look at it? Because I think that's a very interesting question.
Those banks are now exploring, for instance, the topic of CBDCs, yeah, so central bank digital currencies that are kind of somehow controlled by banks, but these are digital currencies, and their spending, their distribution can be fully controlled by the central bank. So this is a big value for the bank, yeah, to be in control of the funds that are circulated on the market. But also, for instance, we have cases of reward assets tokenization, yeah, for instance. So banks are very interested here to participate in that processes, because it allows them to offer those tokenized assets kind of easier and to the bigger pool of clients.
Yep. That is a very interesting thing. I always add, actually, to RWA, I always add like notarization of deeds is something that I'm personally very interested about, because we've all bought a house or have bought or sold. You go to the notary and you pay an exorbitant amount of money for a notary reading your contract. I'm like, okay. So I just paid like a large amount of money for you to write. You put it on chain, you notarize it. I'm fine with that too. You know what I mean? So, adding more assets on chain and I this is also assumption I have, like if you go on chain, you also reach, I think, a different tranche of people that wouldn't have access to what the bank offered before, but now can because of RWA. That might be the other way around, right? So those are interesting things to me, and then I think generally RWA is going in very interesting ways forward. I always thought it was real estate that would make the big splash, but so far that's not really, just a little bit, and in certain countries, but I think Europe-wide still there's a lot of regulation against it. And again, if you're a notary and you're hearing that we want to RWA like real estate and notarize deeds on blockchain, I'm not going to be happy as a notary. But so coming back, yes, I think RWA is a logical next step for banks. Apart from what I said, like implementing blockchain technology, please stay away from anything else that is crypto. And then I'd always argue, and that goes back to me, it's like, okay, if the banks were more transparent, we probably wouldn't have needed blockchain, but we do. So this is then the next step for RWA on chain, and to be able to be audited on chain as well, right? Because I mean, there's too much fraud and problems within banks or overhead that is not properly managed, unfortunately. And we've seen that, I think, in the US over the last 10 years with banks falling down for different reasoning. So I coming back to everything what you just said, yes, I think it's great that there's more institutional attention to this technology. I'm not sure if it's great if there's more institutional attention to the crypto side of things.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Yeah. And regarding the other kind of hot topic on that's currently very much explored by the business, I mean AI. In Intersect, you have companies to somehow combine AI and blockchain. And what are the most interesting use cases that you can see or support?
Man, federal learning
in that space, yeah, that connect AI and blockchain.
Yeah, I think federated learning is interesting. I think, on-chain or like properly confirmed data sets by on-chain metadata for AI, I think is interesting. We've seen it now with the whole copyright thing happening with OpenAI and some of the larger AI players, or the LLM players, actually. I do think, and I'm once again, I'm a skeptical guy when it comes to new technology.
Really? I wouldn't say that.
No, the thing is, I'm an advocate for the vision. I'm very often complaining and bitching about the implementation of that vision. So, and by the way, like I am part of the problem, right? So, I am a bit of the hypocrite here. But I think AI and for AI, probably blockchain is the next step. But what my big issue is both in the AI space and both in the blockchain space, it's still very fragmented. And you see now there's some crossovers happening, but I don't know. What was it, like 5 years ago? We had Near Protocol, and Near Protocol was like, oh yeah, we're now our vision is X, and then like 3 years ago, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna bring the next billion users on chain, and this year it's like, oh, we're gonna bring the next billion agents on chain. I'm like, okay, so there, where is the value that blockchains add really here? And then the second question is, you're an AI company, and you run, like DeepSeek or something. Why the hell would you use blockchain? They're great doing without, right? OpenAI doesn't need blockchain, right? Like they're great doing without. Yeah, they have a bunch of lawsuits, people like arguing that the data that they use.
Maybe blockchain is the place in which you should kind of keep the data that is kind of somehow validated, that is kind of verified, secure, and then you can kind of reason on top of the data and employ the models. Yeah, so that's I think the solution or the way to go.
And we see some of that stuff popping up. We have currently one client that looks into this, but which chain can do it properly? We're still in that research phase to make sure that it's that it actually makes sense, because a lot of chains say they can, and you guys know, obviously, like chains saying what they can do and the documentation but what they actually do versus where they actually are can be 100% different. So we're still looking into that right now with one of our clients to understand better where we can go with his particular use case. And unfortunately, I cannot say too much about the use case, but it definitely involves AI and well, the blockchain part of it is purely for validation and confirmation and not for anything else, ensuring that the data that comes in, and I think that's an proved saying already, I think in the last 2 years, the data that comes in is actually not hallucinated or not fake, or comes actually from data sources that are true, right? That said, and I'm not sure how you guys look at it, but the AI LLM industry is completely blowing up right now. I mean, I've looked at the YC, Y Combinator track for this year, and I mean, like 80% is AI, and I'm always like, okay, I get it, but most of it are just wrappers for LLMs, right? There's nothing new. There's a lot of productivity things that you can do, but I'm not sure if that warrants VC money. And then I always argue, okay, great that you're building a wrapper on a third-party tool, but if that third-party tool decides tomorrow that you don't have access anymore, your business model is gone. And that goes, and that's just the AI side of things. I think blockchain is struggling to find use cases for themselves to make them feel valuable. As to my point of Near, there are newer chains that actually extract a lot of value. I always say, generally, blockchain is very good for blockchain people, right? Like if you cross it, right? I mean, if you cross.
But you know what? We also kind of discovered that in our report. So DLT report says that most of the projects that were done by the companies that already experimented with blockchain, they are more in favor or in going into blockchain projects.
Exactly.
So if you know something, you feel better with that, and you are more eager to continue investing in that space.
Yeah, and I think so blockchain is looking for use cases. And what I said, like there's a lot of these new layer 2s that are great DeFi chains, right? And that it's very often by blockchain for blockchain. But you do that crossover into other technologies, you start to see resistance, right? Because I'm guessing here because I don't do too much in the I would need to ask my co-founder, but I'm guessing that most AI people stay at the AI front. They're not gonna bring blockchain in unless there's a really big need. But so far, I've not seen the need.
Yeah, so like regarding your old industry, so healthcare, there is this company called Oaken, and they actually integrated federal learning into like live production systems for medical research and diagnostics. Yeah,
that is great. That is such a great example. And then look now we're talking about the blockchain technology. We're not talking about, oh yeah, they probably didn't launch a token, right, for their hospital employees.
Yeah.
No, so but these are very good examples. Federated learning is one of my favorite ones because this is a very good example. You can see that in I would say siloed off industries very often that the federated learning is great for this. What I said, like I think there is people try to extract too much value of blockchain technology and always try to add crypto on top of it. But I think if you purely look at blockchain technology and purely look at AI technology, it's a very good match. I think the problem that we're currently having is that people just want to make money by launching a token next to it, and I think that's something we don't need, right? That said, what I said, like I will see what like I'm skeptical about AI, where AI is going, but I can't deny the steps and the opportunity that we have with AI because LLMs have been moving the space forward massively. And I think, so from my perspective, I look at it, I use it, but I'm also constantly questioning myself, okay, what's the real value for this, right? Like, is the real value literally, hey, write me an email to Dominic about how great this podcast was? You know,
It's actually a good idea, I'd say.
yeah,
Why not?
I would invite all the listeners to actually send an email to Dominic.
And I'd say let's park it here, guys. And Thomas, we'll have one more exercise for you, a little game we'd like to play. So I will ask you a few questions, and I would like you to answer with just one word, if that's possible for you. Can we try?
You're asking a lot of me right now.
Yeah, what's the most exciting blockchain use case?
Oh shit. Data validation.
Okay. And one word to describe current crypto regulation.
I have 3 words. Not enough education.
Okay. And what's the most overhyped blockchain use case?
AI.
Will every major bank have a blockchain division in 5 years? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And one word to describe the state of DeFi.
Great. Sorry, no, popcorn. I think that's better.
Oh. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. It's actually all from our side. I think that was really interesting. Thank you so much, Thomas, for sharing all the knowledge, information, and inspiration over the last hour. That was great. And again, you're my favorite extrovert on the internet. So it was so lovely to hear from you and to listen to you, to talk to you. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much for the invite, gentlemen. And I hope this will be a great episode. And for the future episodes, I wish you a lot of luck. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was a bit of controversy regarding the role of traditional finances and banks in the ecosystem, but I hope that what Thomas said is somehow inspirational for you. Remember to stay on the block, to stay ahead.